This is a reading from The Mystical City of God, the Coronation by Venerable Mary of Agreda, Volume 4, Book 2, Chapter 17. The angel Gabriel sent his ambassador to the Most Blessed Mary to inform her that she still had 3 years of life, and what happened to St. John and to all nature at this news. 696. In writing of what still remains of the history of Our Lady, of our only and heavenly Phoenix, the Most Blessed Mary, it is no more than right that our hearts be filled with tenderness and our eyes with tears at the sweet and touching marvels of the last years of her life. I should wish to exhort the devout faithful not to read of them or consider them as past and absent, since the powerful virtue of faith can make these truths present to the mind, and if we look upon them with proper piety and Christian devotion, without a doubt we shall gather the sweetest fruit, and our hearts shall feel the effects and rejoice in the good which our eyes cannot see. 697. The Most Holy Mary had arrived at the age of 67 years without having tarried in her career, ceased in her flight, mitigated the flame of her love, or lessened the increase of her merits from the first instant of her conception. As all this had continued to grow in each moment of her life, the ineffable gifts, benefits, and favors of the Lord had made her entirely godlike and spiritual. The affectionate ardors and desires of her most chaste heart did not allow her any rest outside the center of her love. The bounds of the flesh were most violently irksome. The overwhelming attraction of the divinity to unite itself with her with eternal and most close bonds, according to our mode of speaking, had attained the summit of power in her, and the earth itself, made unworthy by the sins of mortals to contain the treasure of heaven, could no longer bear the strain of withholding her from her true Lord. The Eternal Father desired his only and true daughter, the Son his beloved and most loving mother, and the Holy Ghost the embraces of his most beautiful spouse. The angels longed for their queen, the saints for their great lady, and all the heavens mutely awaited the presence of their empress, who should fill them with glory, with her beauty and delight. All that could be alleged in favor of her still remaining in the world and in the church was the need of such a mother and mistress, and the love which God himself had for the miserable children of Adam. 698. But as some term and end was to be placed to the earthly career of our queen, the divine consistory, according to our mode of understanding, conferred upon the manner of glorifying the most blessed mother and establishing the kind of loving reward due to her for having so copiously fulfilled all the designs of the divine mercy among the children of Adam during the many years in which she had been the foundress and teacher of his holy church. The Almighty therefore resolved to delight and console her by giving her definite notice of the term still remaining of her life, and revealing to her the day and hour of the longed-for end of her earthly banishment. For this purpose, the most blessed Trinity dispatched the Archangel Gabriel with many others of the celestial hierarchies, who should announce to the queen when and how her mortal life should come to an end and pass over into the eternal. 699. The Holy Prince descended with the rest to the cenacle in Jerusalem and entered the oratory of the great lady, where they found her prostrate on the ground in the form of a cross, asking mercy for sinners. But hearing the sound of their music and perceiving them present, she rose to her knees in order to hear the message and show respect to the ambassador of heaven and his companions, who in white and refulgent garments surrounded her with wonderful delight and reverence. All of them had come with crowns and palms in their hands, each one with a different one, but all of them represented the diverse premiums and rewards of inestimable beauty and value to be conferred upon their great queen and lady. Gabriel saluted her with the Ave Maria and added thereto, our Empress and Lady, the Omnipotent and the Holy of the Holies, sends us from his heavenly court to announce to thee in his name the most happy end of thy pilgrimage and banishment upon earth in mortal life. Soon, O Lady, is that day and hour approaching, in which, according to thy longing desires, thou shalt pass through natural death to the possession of the eternal and immortal life, which awaits thee in glory, and at the right hand of thy divine Son, our God. Exactly 3 years from today, thou shalt be taken up and received into the everlasting joy of the Lord, where all its inhabitants await thee, longing for thy presence. 700. The Most Holy Mary heard this message with ineffable jubilee of her purest and most loving spirit, and prostrating herself again upon the earth, she answered in the same words as at the incarnation of the Word, Ecce ancilla Domini, fiat mihi secundum verbum tuum. Behold the handmaid of the Lord, be it done according to thy word. Luke chapter 1, verse 38. Then she asked the holy angels and ministers of the Most High to help her give thanks for this welcome and joyful news. The Blessed Mother, alternately with the seraphim and other angels, sang the responses of a canticle that lasted for 2 hours. Although by their nature and supernatural gifts the angelic spirits are so subtle, wise, and excellent, they were nevertheless excelled in all this by their queen and lady, as vassals are by their sovereign. For in her grace and wisdom abounded as in a teacher. For in her grace and wisdom abounded as in a teacher, in them only as in disciples. Having finished this canticle and humiliating herself anew, she charged the supernal spirits to beseech the Lord to prepare her for her passage from mortal to eternal life, and to ask all the other angels and saints in heaven to pray for the same favor. They offered to obey her in all things, and therewith Saint Gabriel took leave and returned with all his company to the empyrean heaven. 701. The great Queen and Lady for all the universe remained alone in her oratory, and amid tears of humble joy prostrated herself upon the earth, embraced it as the common mother of all, saying, Earth, I give thee thanks as I ought, because without my merit thou hast sustained me 67 years. Thou art a creature of the Most High, and by his will thou hast sustained me until now. I ask thee now to help me during the rest of my dwelling upon thee, so that just as I have been created of thee and upon thee, I may through thee and from thee be raised to the blessed vision of my Maker. She addressed also other creatures, saying, Ye heavens, planets, stars, and elements, created by the powerful hands of my beloved, faithful witnesses and proclaimers of his greatness and beauty, you also I thank for the preservation of my life. Help me then from today on, that with the divine favor I may begin anew to perfect my life during the time left of my career, in order that I may show myself thankful to my and your Creator. 702. The third anniversary of the day following this message, according to the prediction of the Archangel, was to be the day of the glorious transition of the Most Blessed Mary. But from the very hour in which she received the announcement, she became so inflamed with the fires of divine love, and so multiplied her exercises of devotion, that it seemed as if she wished to make up for any relaxation or negligence in her fervor up to that time. The traveler hastens his footsteps when a great part of his way is still before him. As the day declines, the laborer or the merchant redoubles his exertions when evening overtakes him before the completion of his task. But our great Queen hastened on in her heroic efforts, not for fear of the approaching night or the risks of journeying in the dark, but urged on by the loving desires of the eternal light, and in order to enter more rich and prosperous into everlasting joys of the Lord. She immediately wrote to the apostles and disciples to encourage them in their labors for the conversion of the world, and thereafter, during those 3 years, more frequently than before, repeated her injunctions. She used still greater diligence in exhorting and confirming the faithful living near her by her personal intercourse. Although she kept her own secret, yet her behavior was that of one who begins to take her departure and desires to leave her friends rich and prosperous, filled with celestial benedictions. 703. But in regard to the evangelist St. John, she had reason to take a different course, for she regarded him as her son, who attended upon her and assisted her in a special manner. Hence it seemed good to the Most Blessed Lady to inform him of the message regarding her death. After some days, therefore, and after having asked his permission and blessing, she said to him, Thou dost already know, my son and master, that among the creatures of the Most High, I am the most indebted of all, and under the greatest obligations to submit to his holy will. If all other creatures are subject to him, certainly in me ought to be fulfilled entirely all his pleasure for time and eternity. And thou, my son, shouldst help me in this fulfillment, as one who knows by how many titles I belong, body and soul, to my Lord and God. In his condescending mercy he has revealed to me that the end of my mortal life is near, and that from the day on which I have been thus informed, there remain only 3 more years of banishment until my passage into eternal life. I beseech thee, my son, to aid me during this short space of time, in order that I labor in giving thanks to the Most High, and render him some return for the immense blessings I have received of his most liberal love. I beseech thee from the bottom of my heart, pray for me. 704. These words of the Most Blessed Mother tore the heart of St. John, and, unable to restrain his sorrow and his tears, he answered, My mother and my lady, thy will and that of the Most High I am bound to obey in whatever thou commandest, although my merits are far below what they ought to be and what I desired. But do thou, most loving Lady and Mother, help thy poor child, who is to be left an orphan, deprived of thy most desirable company. St. John could add no more because of the sighs and tears pressed from him by his sorrow. Although the loving Queen encouraged and consoled him by sweet and efficacious words, yet on that day the heart of the apostle was pierced by a dart of pain and sorrow, which struck him down and caused him to wither, like the flowers in their bloom, which, when at evening they are about to be deprived of the sun, and after having followed and been rejoiced in its light in its course during the day, sadden and close up at evening. Lest he should lose his life in this affliction, the Most Blessed Mother came to the relief of St. John by her loving promises, assuring him that she would be his mother and advocate with her divine Son. He informed St. James the Less, who, as Bishop of Jerusalem and according to the orders of St. Peter, mentioned above, assisted St. John in the service of the Empress of the world. From that time on, the 2 apostles, mindful of what was coming, were still more solicitous in their attendance upon their Queen and Lady. This was especially true of the evangelist, who would not leave her presence. 705. During the course of these 3 last years of the life of our Queen and Lady, the divine power permitted a certain hidden and sweet force to throw all nature into mourning and sorrow at the prospective death of her who by her life beautified and perfected all creation. The holy apostles, although they were scattered over the earth, began to feel new anxiety and misgivings regarding the time when they should be deprived of their mistress and her help. For already the divine light intimated to them that this event could not be far off. The others of the faithful living in Jerusalem and in the country around began secretly to feel that their treasure and joy should not be theirs much longer. The heavens, the stars, and planets lost much of their brightness and beauty, like the day at the approach of night. The birds of the air fell into singular demonstrations of sorrow during these last years. A great multitude of them ordinarily gathered where the Most Blessed Mary happened to be, surrounding her oratory in unusual flight and motions. They uttered, instead of their natural songs, sorrowful notes, as if they were lamenting and groaning in their grief, until the Lady herself ordered them again to praise their Creator in their natural and musical tones. Of this miracle, St. John was often a witness, joining them in their lamentations. A few days before the transition of the Heavenly Mother, innumerable hosts of the little birds gathered, laying their heads and beaks upon the ground, picking at their breasts in groans, like someone taking farewell forever and asking the last benediction. 706. Not only the birds of the air indulged in the sorrow, but also the brute beasts of the earth. For when one day, according to her custom, the Queen of Heaven went to visit the holy places of the Redemption and arrived on Mount Calvary, many wild beasts came from the surrounding mountains to wait for her. Some of them prostrated themselves upon the ground, others bowed their necks, and all of them uttered sorrowful sounds, and thus for some hours manifested their grief at the impending departure of her whom they recognized as the Lady and the honor of all creation. The most wonderful sign of this general mourning among the creatures was that the light of the sun, the moon, and the stars was diminished, and on the day of her transition they were eclipsed, as at the death of the Redeemer of the world. Although many of the wise and thoughtful men noticed these unwanted changes in the celestial orbs, all were ignorant of the cause, and could only express their astonishment. But the apostles and disciples, who, as I shall relate further on, were present at her most sweet and happy death, knew then that all these signs were tokens of sorrow in insensible nature. The unintelligent things of creation justly anticipated their mourning for the loss of their queen, while intelligent human nature failed to weep over the departure of its sovereign, its legitimate mistress, its true beauty and adorning glory. In the former alone seemed to be fulfilled the prophecy of Zacharias, that in that day the earth shall weep, and the families of the house of God, each one for itself, and that this mourning shall be as for the death of the firstborn, over which all are accustomed to weep. This mourning, which the prophet predicts for the only begotten of the eternal Father, was due in proportion also to the death of the most pure Lady, as the firstborn daughter of grace and of life. And just as their faithful vassals and servants clothe themselves in mourning, not only at the death of their prince or their queen, but also at the prospect of their danger or of their loss, so the irrational creatures anticipated the feelings and the tokens of their sorrow at the approach of the transition of the Most Holy Mary. 707. The evangelist, before all others, shared in their sorrow, and in a special manner and more deeply than all the rest felt this impending loss, without being able to conceal it or dissemble it from the more familiar inmates of the house. 2 daughters of the master of the house, who were much in attendance upon the queen of the world, and some other very devout persons, chanced to see him shedding many tears in his sorrow. As they knew the peaceful and tranquil disposition of the saint, they conjectured that this unusual emotion was caused by some very weighty event. And in their kind solicitude, they a few times urged him to tell them the cause of this unusual sorrow, in order to relieve him if possible. The holy apostle suppressed his grief, and for a long time concealed its cause, but not without divine dispensation. He finally yielded to their importunities, and told them that the happy transition of their mother and lady was approaching, for these were the titles the evangelist applied to the most blessed Mary in her absence. Hence, some time before it really took place, this impending loss of the church became known to some of the more familiar acquaintances of the queen, for none of those that came to know of it could restrain their tears and sorrow at this irreparable loss. Thenceforward they multiplied their intercourse and their petitions with the Blessed Mother, throwing themselves at her feet, kissing the spots where her sacred feet had trod, asking her to bless them and take them with her, and not to forget them in the glory of the Lord, whither she was about to carry away with her the hearts of all her servants. 708. It was a great mercy and providence of the Lord that many faithful of the primitive church were thus timely forewarned of the death of their queen, for he does not send labors and evils to his people without first manifesting them to his servants, as it is said by the prophet Amos, chapter 3, verse 7. Although this loss could not be spared to the faithful of that age, the divine clemency ordained that in as far as was possible, the primitive church should find a compensation for the loss of its mother and mistress, and that its tears and sorrow should be the means of obliging her during the space of time which still remained of her life, to favor and enrich them with the treasures of divine grace, which, as the mistress of them all, she could confer upon them in her departure. As for their consolation, she really did, for the maternal bosom of the Blessed Lady in this extremity was moved by the tears of the faithful, and during those last days of her life, she obtained from her divine Son for them, and for all the church, new mercies and blessings of the divinity. In order not to deprive the church of these new favors, the Lord did not wish to take away from them unwarned his blessed mother, in whom they trusted for help, consolation, joy, relief in necessities, lightening of their labors, counsel in their doubts, succor in their afflictions, and all kinds of blessings. 709. At no time and on no occasion were those ever disappointed who trusted in the great Mother. She relieved and helped all that did not resist her loving and clement advances. But during the last 2 years of her life, no one could count or estimate the wonders of beneficence she wrought upon the mortals of all classes that flocked in multitudes around her. All the sick that presented themselves before her she healed in body and soul. She converted many to the evangelical truth. She drew innumerable souls from sin to the state of grace. She relieved the great miseries of the poor, dispensing what she possessed or what was offered to her as gifts, and succoring many others by miraculous means. She confirmed all in the fear of God, in faith and obedience to the church, and, as mistress and only treasurer of the riches of the divinity of the life and death of her divine Son. She wished to throw open all her riches of liberal mercy before her death, in order to enrich all her children in the Holy Church. And above all, she consoled them and encouraged them by her promise that she would continue to this day to favor us at the right hand of her divine Son. Instruction which the great Queen of the angels gave me. 710. My daughter, in order to understand the jubilee caused in me by the announcement of the end of my mortal life, men must consider the desire and force of the love that urged me on to reach and see God in the glory he had prepared for me from all eternity. This mystery entirely exceeds human capacity, and what the children of the Church are able to understand of it for their consolation, they do not seek to merit or make themselves capable of, for they do not apply the interior light or purify their consciences for its proper reception. On thee, my divine Son, and I have liberally conferred this and other mercies, and I assure thee, my dearest, that happy are the eyes which see what thou hast seen, and the ears which hear what thou hast heard. Guard thy treasure, and do not lose it. Labor with all thy power to gain the fruit of this knowledge and of my teaching. I desire of thee that part of this fruit shall be to dispose thyself from this hour for thy death in imitation of me. Since, having the certainty of its coming, any space of time should seem short to thee for completing this business of eternal loss or gain. No rational creature was so certain of eternal reward as I. Yet, notwithstanding this certainty, I received notice of my death 3 years in advance, and thou hast seen how, nevertheless, I disposed myself and prepared myself for the hour of death with the holy fear proper to a mortal and earth-born creature. Excuse me. In this I acted as a creature subject to death, and as the teacher of the Church, giving an example to the rest of the faithful of what they are to do as mortals, and as more in want of such preparation for avoiding eternal damnation. 711. Among the absurd fallacies introduced by the demon into the world, none is greater or more pernicious than the forgetfulness of the hour of death, and of what is to happen at the court of the rigorous judge. Consider, my daughter, that through this portal sin entered into the world. For the serpent sought to convince the first woman principally that she would not die and need not think of that matter. Genesis chapter 3, verse 4. Thus, continually deceived, there are uncountable fools who live without thought of death and who die, forgetful of the unhappy lot that awaits them. In order that thou mayest not be seized by this human perversity, begin to convince thyself now that thou must die irrevocably, that thou hast received much and paid little, that the account shall be so much the more rigorous as the judge has been more liberal in the gifts and talents lavished upon thee in thy sphere. I do not ask of thee more, and also not less, than what thou owest to thy spouse and to thy Lord, which is always to operate the best in all places, times, and occasions, without permitting any forgetfulness, intermission, or carelessness. 712. If in thy weakness thou incurrest the guilt of some omission or negligence, let not the sun go down or the day pass without having sorrowed for it, or confessed it, if thou canst, as if it were for the last account. Proposing amendment, even of the slightest fault, commence to work with new fervor and solicitude, like one from whom the time is slipping away, for accomplishing such an arduous and laborious task as the gaining of eternal glory and felicity, and the avoiding of everlasting death and punishment. This is to be the continual occupation of all thy spiritual and sensitive faculties, in order that thou make thy hope certain and joyful. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 7. In order that thou mayest not labor in vain. Philippians chapter 2, verse 16. Nor run on into the uncertain. 1 Corinthians 9, verse 26. Like those who content themselves with some good works, which they mix up with many reprehensible and detestable crimes, these cannot walk in security and joy of interior hope, since their own conscience assails them and saddens them, unless they are lost in forgetfulness and in the foolish delights of the flesh. In order to fill all thy works with perfection, Continue the exercises I have shown thee, and also those thou art accustomed to in preparation for death, and all the prayers, prostrations, and aspirations thou usually practicest. Then receive the spiritual viaticum as if for departure from the earth to the other life, taking leave and forgetting all that thou hast in this life. Enkindle thy heart with the desire of seeing thy God, and rise up to his presence, where is to be thy future habitation and thy present conversation. Philippians chapter 3, verse 20.